Thank you. Our next speaker is Peter Neill. Peter is the founder and director of World Ocean Observatory and serves as the host of World Ocean Radio, a weekly podcast about the health of the ocean. Peter previously served for 20 years as the president of South Street Seaport Museum in New York, and he was the co-founder of the Sound School and the Harbour School, and has dedicated his career to marine affairs. Peter has fought to highlight issues surrounding climate change and the future of oceans. He's fought for this to ICMM audiences for literally decades. In 2013, Peter delivered an impassioned speech to the 16th ICMM Congress in Cascais in Portugal about the need and the opportunity for maritime museums to show leadership in this area. He gave us all a blue marble. And Steve and I were talking about this the other day, and Steve's brought his along too. And I'm probably stealing Peter's thunder here, but at that talk he showed this, and he said, as a symbol of the blue planet, and he challenged and urged us all to keep this as a reminder of our duty as guardians of the blue planet. And as you can see, Steve and I still retain our blue marbles. Probably don't have our marbles, we've got a blue marble. For many years, Peter, to my mind, has been ICMM's canary in the coal mine, alerting us to what may lay ahead and how maritime museums can show leadership to the world. So Peter, it's time for you to sing.
It's hard to sing when you're in tears. I issued the challenge and nobody paid any attention. So I'm going to do it again. This may be my last time. What? Communication is everything, Anya, and I agree with you, and her presentation was wonderful. I can't help myself but to point out one terrifyingly important omission, which is that the ocean begins at the mountaintop, and it ends at the abyssal plain. And that one fact is precluding the world's population from truly understanding that the ocean, the freshwater ocean continuum, is the natural system that is essential to human survival. Without it, we die. It's just that simple. But every time we communicate, we must remind people that the ocean is not this place apart, but it is a place that exists in the aquifer, it exists in the atmosphere, it exists in the glacier, it exists in the watersheds, and finally it reaches the coast and the deep sea, and it comes around again, time after time after time. And until that one fact is understood, we will make very little progress. So if I don't know if I can master the technology. Are you all sitting up straight? My mother, when I'd come down for breakfast of butter, should say, "Sit up straight." And my father would say, he would mumble something didactic about duty. And I never knew quite what he meant by duty, but I've tried. What is the presence of maritime experience in modern life? And the only way we're going to understand and answer that question is to understand what it has been in historical life. And if you start to realize that our world was shaped, measured, understood by ocean exploration and science, by maritime trade and acculturation, until we understand that integrated concept of who we are and what the ocean freshwater continuum contributes to modern life today, we will remain historians. And I have to tell you, that's not good enough. So is there a new organizing principle? And that's what I would like to talk about today. These are maritime trends, themes. You understand them all. Your museums are filled with lovely exhibitions that demonstrate the history of these things. But if you understand and look at these things carefully, you realize that every one of them has a viable, important future today moving forward. So if you just stop for a moment, hit the pause button for the moment, become futurists for the moment, not historians, and look forward and understand that things like immigration, emigration, climate refugees are part of the history that you've told, that fisheries is part of the future of the history that you've told, that politics and governance is part of the history of the future of what you have told. So the fact is that I urge you to stop being historians and become futurists. And that will make the difference. So reaffirmation of what we already have. And this is how, in many ways, they are relevant to now. I'm not going to read them all, but you can just look at, I'll look at two, mapping. The Nippon Foundation in Japan is funding a massive exercise to try to map the ocean floor, which, what is it, 5%, 10% mapped? And yet here's this enormous, 70% of the Earth's surface is oceanic, and we don't even understand the bottom. And yet we're about to go and mine the bottom. We're going to go drill in the bottom. We're going to go take everything that the bottom and the ocean column sustains as food. I am more cynical about China, because if you look at the contribution by China to the exploitation of fisheries outside of national jurisdiction, you find an extraordinary percentage of that activity is Chinese. When they stop that and at the same time do the other thing, I'll become a believer. Anyway, these are just topics that you can look at. Take a look at the last one, the ocean genome. What exists in the ocean in terms of species that are not yet identified, not yet discovered? That inventory, that genetic inventory, holds the cures of diseases that we don't yet even know. So it becomes a kind of massive exercise of suicide to essentially to avoid these challenges and to understand them and to communicate them. Can genocide be self-inflicted? Here are other values that are pertinent now. We have slavery today. There's modern slavery. It's called something different. If you've ever looked at any of Ian Urbina's work on slavery at sea and the fishing fleets, it's astonishing what's out there. People literally taken prisoner and enslaved. Invasive species is a kind of massive threat, which we perpetuate. In fact, we instigate. Boat people. My cab driver today, Eritrea, Tunisia, by boat to Europe, camps, Canada, free. Right outside my door, by accident this morning, I see a perfect example of the essential concept of connection enabled by ocean. We talk about it historically. We didn't even talk about slavery for years. This organization failed for years to touch one of the most important historical narratives of marine history and global acculturation. For years, we never took it up. And now we still tiptoe. We tiptoe. And when we talk about colonization, I'm going to digress here, because this is a favorite peeve of mine, and you see I have many, is that what are we responding to? And have we actually ever acknowledged in our exhibits and our history the true impact of colonization? Not that we're going to make amends or reparation for it now. That's great, and I totally agree with it. I think it's wonderful. I think that I actually believe in reparation. But the fact is we have ignored our responsibility already as perpetrators of the one interpretation of what we call colonization. In some cases, in Canada, in the United States, we destroyed people's ways of life. We stole their language. We stole their property. I was just in Greenland, where, in fact, even though Westerners came as Vikings very early on, they didn't stay. And while Denmark claimed Greenland as a colony for a long, long, long time, 95% of the people who live in Greenland today are Inuit. They know their language. And where I live, where the Wabanaki people live, there are 7 people remaining who actually have any understanding of their native language. And the elders of those communities have designated young people as receptacles of the language, and they have to accept as a cultural responsibility, and they are learning the language again as vehicles and connectors from the past to the future, from one generation colonized to the next decolonized. So even the interpretation of what we already do, I believe, should be revised. So what are the tools? How do we do it? Oh my goodness, how do we do it? It's so simple. The first tool is willpower. The first tool is to do it, say it, and mean it, own it. And I've made this speech 10 times, well, maybe 4. As it was, it's a genetic thing, exaggeration. Some people have blue eyes. But the point here is you being here, listening here, walking away and going home and not owning the power and accepting the tool and exercising the will means that it is a complete and utter failure. And I will point out even that the United Nations, in terms of the climate agreements and all the rest, the Big Ocean Summit, I didn't go to Lisbon because I knew what was going to happen. I said, I just can't bear it. I can't bear being there. Because what I would see would be 3,000 people, all the leaders of the ocean apparat worldwide, thumping their chests, exchanging their cards, buying each other's drinks, comparing in a kind of non-competitive language the fact that they're doing something that the other person isn't or is better. And at the very end, in the final communiqué, there is 3 paragraphs of look at what we've done. But as Anya pointed out, the last paragraph was an existential cry for help. We have not done enough. We have not done enough in time. How does the entire ocean apparat reorganize itself and repurpose itself to actually complete what has been laid out and what the data reveals? So these are tools. And some of them you'll understand, some of them are familiar, some of them you already have programs, education programs, all that. But look at what you're teaching. Look at how you're teaching. And look where you're teaching. And if you look at some of these things, the fact is that you're not confined to your building. You're not confined to the old textbook. You're not confined to your local community or to the city in which you dwell. That you can be local, you can be regional, you can be national, you can be international, you can be collective as opposed to individual. And by doing that, you actually have the tools in your hands to make the difference that we talk about. distance learning, classroom network. The Ocean School is a beautiful example. That's a lovely film. It's a great example of what can be done. Boat building programs here and there, all good, but they're isolated. They're independent. They're too small. And don't talk to me about money. Money follows magic. Make magic and the money will follow. So if you've determined that you're going to be an educational institution and you're going to do it through intergenerational transfer of skills, then invest in it. If you're going to sail your vessel, if you're going to, you have a 100-year-old schooner and you're going to sail your vessel, you're not just going to take people out for harbor tours, you're going to take blind children sailing. And when you do that, and when you take these children and you put them on the deck, you've raised the sails, you've turned off the engine, and you let them sit there and waken them just before they go to sleep, and you sit them in a circle and you say, "What did you see?" And what you will hear, and thereafter what you will feel, is the most astonishing identification with the power of the ocean as a psychological force, as the kind of force that has made myths that determine, has driven religion and religious rites, baptism. The fact is that the ocean and water represents a key element of every soul on earth. And that's the potential audience that you have. So these are tools, but they're tools only for a new value proposition. Now, there's a lot of talk about ocean literacy. Don't really get me started on this. But these are the premises. There's a whole matrix of ocean literacy. A lot of people have done a lot of wonderful work on it. If you look at the matrix, it is a curricular outcome of these premises applied, etc. You see that you have in this potential the principles by which you could design your own exhibitions, your programs, your public programs, and the content of what you provide, and that these things are universal. These are universal premises on which you can build a system of education for the next generation. And that's your world. That's your role. Your role is not to have the old guys come back around and sing shanties aboard, but actually you want young people in place, and you want them on the front lines. And you want them, if they've learned boating skills, to teach boating skills. If they've had sea experience, you want them to take the values that they have learned aboard an operating vessel and apply it in their own lives. Teach it to their own children. Demonstrate it as members of the community. And all of that is there in your hands. So education is the strategic core. Here's a whole list of them. I do want to talk about two. It's sort of like the Ocean School. Actually, I founded two high schools. One in New Haven, Connecticut, called the Sound School. One in New York City, called the Harbor School. These are accredited, full curriculum, public high school programs in which every course, and I mean every course, down to sports and shop, is organized around maritime experience. So, do we play football? No. Do we sail and swim? Yes. And if we do that competitively, that's fine. Do we learn skills that can be applied vocationally, and people go out and they become graduates and they go on to the maritime academies, or they become merchant seamen, or whatever it may be? That's great. If they've also just taken the values and things that they've learned and the perspective that they've been given, and they put it and they become stock traders or insurance brokers, fabulous. Because their attitudes will have changed, and therefore their behaviors will have changed. And therefore the structures that they oversee will have changed. And therefore the value system that has got us into the situation now, consumption, unlimited growth, will have changed. So we have in our hands the ability to actually solve this problem, not study it, Not exhibit it, but solve it. Now, I want to show you just one little example. This is something that World Ocean Observatory has done. I have BUMF, if anybody wants to talk about it later. If my good people in the room will show the video. So that's a teaser. What that represents is a project that we are building. It's web-based. It will enable anyone on any device, anywhere in the world, to access the full spectrum of the ocean's contribution to science and humanities. It will include a gallery, and I'd love to talk with ICMM about this, on maritime culture and traditions. It will also look at the world watershed. It will also look at the edge. It will also look at the deep sea. It will also look at the nature of maritime work. These are all galleries that will be available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, on any device, at no cost, no barrier to entry. And you may say, well, oh my goodness, how are we going to do that? You're going to get it for free. And my challenge to you is, if you don't use it and you don't call me, don't call. Anyway, so what I want to do is to conclude is to give you a challenge, 21st century challenge, already 22 years into it, I'm sorry to say. But it's a revolutionary concept for global engagement. And these I might read, actually, and go over, to reaffirm local maritime history and the story of globalization. Easy peasy. We already do that one way or another. Incubate program invention and new educational initiatives. Not so easy peasy. Not so evident. How are you going to do that? Meet the need for this new vigor through collaborators, partners, and novel strategies. Reach out, welcome, partner, network, invent. Stop relying on the conventions that have held us, this industry together. Barely. Accept the challenge to do these things by opening yourselves up to invention. Maximize the efficiency of the World Wide Web. You have a tool for communication that can reach almost everybody on Earth. Rich, poor, north, south. You have the ability through that to expand not only your local visitation, but your worldwide audience. And many museums have enormous regional relevance that contributes to the worldwide understanding. Others have global collections that also can contribute in a different, another way. But you have to understand that expansion and the welcome of that audience is paramount. Reimagine your purpose, not as what it has been in the past. Go back and look at your mission statement. And I guarantee you, if you accept this challenge, you'll change it. And it will become a kind of reinvigorating, redefined, forward-looking strategic initiative that is institutionalized in your fundamental statement of purpose. And this will allow you, by making magic and showing that you're relevant, this will turn into finance. Money follows magic. And if you have something of value, and you have something that you're open-minded enough to show that value and introduce it into places that never understood that you had that value, that will translate into revenues, stable finances. And by the way, how do you measure that? It's not just dollars. It's not just the bottom line. Yes, we have to make the bottom line. We have to run like a business. I know. But the fact is there's another measure of value, and that's connection. That's actually fulfilling the purpose that is underneath your charters as tax-exempt organizations. Amplify this engagement through shared revolutionary change. Join and enjoin a worldwide community of citizens of the ocean, and demonstrate to everyone within your purview, within your reach, hearing your exclusive voice fully articulated and loud, amplified, that you will demonstrate this connection of the sea that connects all things. Thank you.
We're running slightly over. Let's have a couple of quick questions.
Is this on? Okay, can you turn this on?
Do we have any questions?
Is this on?
Yes.
I have a microphone for you.
Thank you, Peter, for, as always, an engaging and highly depressing presentation. I share your pessimism. One thing that I would like to suggest, or a couple of things I'd like to suggest is, we talk a lot about colonialism, and we talk a lot about immigration, and we talk about climate refugees today in the context of this meeting. One thing as historians we don't talk about is colonialism and immigration out of Europe as a function of climate refugees as well, right, over the Little Ice Age between 1300 and 1850, essentially the start of the Industrial Revolution and the re-warming of the planet. One thing you don't address, and I think is missing from most of what we talk about when we talk about maritime history, whether it's colonialism or indigenous people or climate or oceans, is the law. And this is something that we are all connected to. All of our countries, all of our municipalities have law. I haven't heard anybody mention the failure of the 5th round of negotiations of the UN Ocean Treaty just last month. If we look at the treaties of Tordesillas and Zaragoza and link that to the doctrine of discovery and the way European colonists in the Americas asserted themselves over indigenous populations, we see that there is this very rich context for examining the law in many facets in maritime history. And I think it's one that's very accessible to people because, as I said, everybody engages with the law at some point.
Is that a question, Lincoln?
Yes, so my question is, to what extent do you think, because I didn't see it anywhere mentioned in any of your paradigms for the history or now, or how do we teach it going forward, where do you think the law fits?
Oh, well, you point to two examples, but there's two parts to it. There's policy and there's law. We do policy pretty well. If you look at I have a little enterprise I'm looking at 10 ways that the ocean can save civilization. And 2 of them are policy and science and policy. So science, policy, and law. And we have policies, but then we come to execute the policies, and the recent failure in New York is a perfect example of that. Why did it fail? It failed because it didn't satisfy commercial interests and justified by the idea of sovereignty, and sovereignty is this legal structure. So you're absolutely right. I'm going to correct it. I stand corrected. I will change it because it's true that until we understand that order, whether it's regulation or law, or it's the International Seabed Authority, or it's the Paris Agreement, or it's regional management treaties and agreements, they are legal constructs and obligations, and we should be involved in those, if only to communicate that they exist, and that they are worthy, or they should be analyzed, and they should be applied, because ultimately this citizens of the ocean concept is about building political will for that kind of change. If you educate people and they understand what's at stake, then they will vote or act out of a newly discovered self-interest. By the way, this is shameless what I'm about to do, but if you have not read Lincoln Payne's book on the Sea and Civilization, you must go buy it now and read it. Forget Ernesto, whatever it is, and get that book. It's only one volume, first of all, and it's just 600 pages instead of 1,600 pages. But the point is, it does what, and I didn't steal it this time, although I often do, Lincoln said when he addressed this Congress 2 or 3 times ago, and he opened his remarks by saying, I want to change the way you see the world. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. How do we change the way we see the world, and we're the initiated, and then how we recommit, and then we become agents of that transformational change.
Thank you. If people have other questions, you'll have to take those up in the morning tea session, in the morning tea break. Can you please join me in thanking Peter?